Welcome everybody to the second ever Theoretical Thursday debates. This time I have Kira, Dave joining me with a hot debate. Okay, so I'll just preface the question if anyone hasn't heard of it. I mean, it's up on the stream. It's not too confusing, but it's just how many holes does a straw have? One or two? Yeah. Dave believes it's two. I believe it's one. I won't lie. So when you told me that you wanted to debate this, or that you would be down to debate this, I asked you which side you were taking, and when you said two, I was like, oh, this is gonna be the freest debate of my life.
I mean, we'll see. I think we'll see. We'll see. Okay, why don't you go ahead and start, and then I'll respond afterwards.
Perfect. Okay, so what I'm gonna say is that a straw has one hole. It has one hole with two entrances that you can go through it. The mathematical definition, it gets a little confusing, but to me what a hole is, it's like something that goes through something, you know?
Okay.
So if I poke a hole in a piece of paper, I would consider that one hole. If I was just to be simple, you know, if I poke 15 holes in a piece of paper.
So, okay.
Yeah, jump in.
Then we're going to say that, you know, the ends on each side of the straw are entrances, or like openings, instead of the holes.
Yeah, I would say in this specific case, yeah, it would be one hole with two entrances. That's correct.
Okay, so then let's say if there's a mountain and someone like digs like in a cave into it, right?
Yeah.
Is that not a hole? Is that, you know, an entrance to a cave? And then is a cave different from a hole, basically?
I see what you're saying. So you're saying a cave in a mountain, or, you know, digging a hole in the sand, is that considered a hole?
Exactly, yeah.
And so this is a great point, and I think this is a problem with the English language in general. I think it's a little too vague. So I have some examples here. I'm just going to pull it up on Paint here. So on this side right here, I'm just going to put, you know, phrases that we know in English. So for example, you know, hole in one, golf term, right? And that hole is, you know, not a hole that goes through.
Right.
Hole in the wall, another term. That kind of what you're talking about. Everyone's favorite, an asshole. You know, only has one entrance. But then you have the other side of it, which is things like hole puncher. That's all the way through. Poke a hole. That's a common phrase. People also say, you know, I ripped a hole in my jeans. Round peg in a square hole. Now notice all these are singular. A hole. None of these are poked two holes. So I think what you have to do is you have to, when arguing this, ignore the English language and focus on the actual mathematical definition of a hole.
I don't think that anyone would argue that, you know, like a hole in one or a hole in the wall is not a hole. I mean, a lot of people still consider those things holes, and it's not that those things are, like, you know, technically, like, by definition, not holes.
Yes.
People would still say that they're holes.
Yeah. Yeah, people would say they're holes. People would say, you know, I dug a hole in the sand, and they would also say I poked a hole in this piece of paper. But you can't have both. You know what I'm saying? You're my man. If you're trying to say that, you know, it's one hole, you can't base your argument off of the English language, because the English language has gone both ways in the past. So that's why I would say that argument specifically doesn't do too much justice. Okay,
so, you know, say we're digging a hole in the sand, right?
Yeah.
And say you're just like walking along the beach and you see a hole, you know, like something dug into the sand, right?
Yeah.
You would say that's one hole. And then if you walk further and you see another thing dug into the sand, you would say that's also a hole. Or like a lot of people would say that's also a hole, right?
Yeah.
But if those two things were connected, then you guys would say that there's actually just one hole and they're connected underground, right?
One hole, two entrances? Yeah. Yeah,
okay.
I see what you're saying. So if you had two holes in the sand and they were connected underneath, you're asking what I would call that? And I would call that one hole, two entrances. No different than a straw, no different than a tunnel through a mountain to drive through.
Okay, so if we take the, you know, the golf course analogy here, and you're gonna go and you're gonna play and you're gonna see 18 holes, right?
Yeah.
If they were all connected underground, would you call that just one hole?
if they were all connected on. So if there's an 18-hole golf course, at that point, I don't think that would be a hole at all. I think that would be something else. And honestly, if I'm going to backtrack for a bit here, if I could, I don't even know if these are necessarily holes. I would more so consider them cavities, to be quite honest. So if there's like this little thing in the sand, I might consider that more of a cavity than a hole. And the reason for that is it's because when does it become a hole? So when you go to the beach isn't flat. It has a bunch of bumps and grooves. So how big does one of these grooves have to be for you to consider it a hole?
Yeah, that's a good question. You know, okay. So I also don't think that using the English language in this way is like the right way to argue about this because there's so many, you know, like similar words for like a hole, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
I see the mathematical side of it. That makes sense. Well, okay. So that's another thing, right? Like, you know, a donut, they'll say like a donut has a hole, right?
Yes.
Or like if you poke a pencil through a piece of paper, that's also just one hole, right?
Yeah.
But if you like, let's take a mountain again, and we're looking down at the top of the mountain, right? Okay, so if you look down on it and you look to the left and there's an opening, and you look to the right and there's an opening, whether that hole or the tunnel goes all the way through the mountain or not, you can see two different openings or holes, right?
Yes.
And if you look at a donut, which is a lot, you know, closer in what distance between the two openings, then it also could have two holes depending on if you're looking down at it that way, right? Or like say like a tunnel, like a bridge on both sides, you can see two holes looking down on it.
Yes.
Now, like a piece of paper, people will say, well, that's obviously one hole. But if you were small enough and you look down on the piece of paper, it obviously has width, right?
Yeah.
And so you still see two holes, whether or not the tunnel is actually connected or not.
So I see what you're saying here. So you're basically saying if you didn't know if they connect, you would still consider them holes. Is that what you're saying? Because the difference between...
I don't think it matters if it connects or not. I think that regardless of the situation, you could still see two holes. And like, oh man, okay, with the English language, it does get tricky.
It definitely does. Yes.
But like, yeah, like if, you know, a hole went through from like China to the U.S., you know, like people in China would say that's one hole, and they travel to the U.S., they'd still say that's another hole. Like it may connect, but they still say, oh, there's two holes in the earth kind of thing.
I'm saying if you dug a hole through the earth and you were 1 foot away from hitting China, from breaking that crust, that wouldn't be a complete hole.
Okay.
You'd have to get all the way through. Because then it's an argument of when does a divot, when does a crevice, when does a cavity become a hole? You know? So something that I imagined when I was thinking about this is, imagine you have a ball of Play-Doh. And you're trying to make a circle out of that ball of Play-Doh. But it's never going to be perfectly round. You're going to have small, you know, little divots in there.
Right, and you could consider each change in like altitude.
Do you consider each change a hole?
Really wide.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Do I live in a hole because I live in the valley of California? You know, is that considered a hole because the regions around me are higher? I think the reason it has to be one hole is because if you say it's two holes, well then how deep does, you know, a crevice have to be a hole? And I don't think, unless you have an answer for that, that we could argue that or figure that out. Unless you do have an answer.
Well, okay, so like say, you know, you live in a valley surrounded by mountains, right?
Yeah.
Basically, like there are like somewhat lower like valleys in this mountain, and then there's the very lowest point.
So that lowest point's a hole?
Yeah, surrounded by the pieces of land around it. Like, well, oh, that's a good one. I haven't thought of that before, actually.
So this is where I live, right? And I live in this one. Do I live in a hole? Or is this the hole?
So are you living in one of those like upside down rectangular points, or just the entire area between the two mountains?
Let's say there's three people, all right? There's person 1, person 2, person 3. And then, you know, person 4 at the top of this tip. Who lives in a hole here?
Yeah. And for person one, the mountain range completely encircles the entire area.
Yeah.
It's not just like on the left and right.
Yeah. They're in between these mountains.
You know, I would say 2 and 3 live in a hole.
And why is that?
I would.
Why not 1? If it is technically, you know, a lower point. What makes this a hole and this not a hole?
No, I would say 1 does live in a hole.
1 does live in a hole.
Yes.
So then, if you're saying that, then your hole completely depends on context, right? Because if this is where I live, you know, what if I do this? I think you see what I'm about to do here. But, you know, what if there's way larger mountains over here?
Uh-huh.
Is now 4 in a hole? Is it all dependent on context?
I would say that the next like immediate surroundings, like the next immediate terrain around them needs to be higher than them, or like more encompassing than. So like 4 would not be in a hole because to the left would be like, let's say he is like slightly to the right of the peak of that mountain, right?
Yeah.
To the left of him, he is like enclosed, but to the right of him, it's moving down and away from him.
Yes.
Which means that he's not completely enclosed by like walls.
Okay. So then should 1 also not be a hole? Because immediately there's not a there. I mean, over here there is, but immediately there's these 2 divots.
Yeah. So 1 doesn't technically live in a hole. Like again with the English language, like he could be in a cave, right? But he's not in a hole because there's like further. Yeah, I would say 1's not in a hole.
Okay, so then it is context dependent, kind of, right?
Yeah.
So
well, okay, so my absolute true belief is that it is very perception dependent, and like, for example, if you're looking, you know, straight on through the straw, then you see 1 hole. But if you're looking at like the, you know, from the top down, then it would be 2 holes.
Okay.
But yeah. Anyway.
And do you believe that poking a hole, if I just go back to the piece of paper, is poking a hole in a piece of paper, is that 2 holes for you?
It depends. Well, yeah. To me, I would just say it's 2 holes. I think it like truly depends on like where you're looking at it from. But
if I just have a piece of paper and I just poke a hole in it,
yeah.
Is that 2 holes? Like is this?
Yeah. Well, because if you're looking down on above it, like it has width. So it has to be 2 different holes.
So then what's a situation where there's only 1 hole? Is that like one of these divots? Like this is a hole, this is 1 hole for you, but anything that goes through something is 2 holes, right? Is that?
Yes, that's what I would say.
Okay. So then I guess my question for you is, what about a 2-dimensional object, like a circle?
Yeah.
Is that 1 hole? Is that no holes? What is that for you? Something that has no depth?
I think if it has 0 depth, then there can only be 1 hole.
Then there can only be 1 hole?
Yeah.
But the moment it gains any depth, that's when you say it has 2 holes.
Yes.
Okay, so that's where I differ from you. I would say that a circle is 1 hole, and it doesn't matter how much depth you add to it.
Mm-hmm.
It's always going to be 1 hole. And I think the donut is kind of the best way to visualize it, because the rounded objects in a donut, you know, it doesn't matter how you spin a donut. Like if you imagine you have a donut that you can spin and invert in multiple ways, you're always going to have 1 hole.
So would you say a 2D circle is a hole? You would say that. You did say that was.
Yes, that is a hole. That is a hole.
Now, if you, you know, were able to cut the straw in half, right?
Okay.
Would you say that that's now 2 different holes?
If it's
Because
is it
the
2
two
different
chambers
straws now?
are separated. Yes.
So I had 1 straw, I cut it in half, now I have 2 straws, so I have 1 hole per straw, 2 holes.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
you would call that 2 holes.
I would call that 2 holes, absolutely, yeah.
So what if we cut up, you know, 1 million, like, if you cut up the straw 1 million times, then you would say there's like 1 million holes, or maybe 1,000,001 because you made an extra cut. But
Yeah,
you know.
1 million holes, yeah, sure. If I cut it
Okay.
1 million times, yeah.
And if you put all of these holes as all of these like cut up straws as packed as closely together back into like its original straw form, you would still call that one hole, or would that be like in like a million holes, or
If I'm able to connect them so they're completely sealed,
uh-huh.
then it's one hole. If I'm unable
Okay.
to do it and it's not sealed, then no, it's a million holes. That's
So,
but
what does sealed mean? As long as there's no air passing through?
yeah, sealed would mean yeah, as long as no air, whatever, they're connected. They're connected. If I look at it in a
Okay.
two-dimensional sense, they're connected.
So then, as long as the atoms are not allowing any air molecules to get through, then you would say that it is now connected and there's no more holes, right?
Yes,
Or like there's just one hole, I mean.
there is. We would bring it back to one hole. Yeah.
But what if there were like, like
Where
20
are you going with this
electrons-
one, Dave?
like 20 electrons or 20 atoms all like in a circle, right? Then air can still pass through that. There's still space in between,
Okay.
right? But you would still only call that like, man.
Are you
see
trying
what
to
I'm
ask
saying?
me on like a microscopic level if I have a straw? Or what is this a better way to phrase it? If I have a straw with a bunch of slits in it, is that maybe?
No, it's like even though like air maybe not be able to pass through it, there
Uh-huh.
could still be a hole that's like on a smaller molecular scale than
Sure.
just air.
Sure.
So like if a ton of electrons were like somehow placed like in a circle, then air could still pass through them, or like something could still pass through them.
I would say to the best of my knowledge, I would consider it one hole. But if I found out there was an opening, no matter how small it is, then I might consider that two holes. But
But then
there's
doesn't
no way for me to know.
everything have a hole because there's always
Oh,
like
Dave.
empty space that could pass through.
Well,
holes.
yeah, because plastic's not, completely sealed. Molecules can pass through it. So you're saying nothing's a hole in that sense?
Well, no, there's just like an infinite amount of holes in the straw. Because like that's what I'm saying by your
No, I
definition.
see what you're saying. Look,
right?
I see what you're
Like
saying.
if you're saying that any time that there's like a circle, like that there's a hole, and there's like an infinite amount of holes in every straw, like I don't think that's the right. I'm saying that I don't think that's the right way to think about it.
So this is what plastic looks like up close. And it's not the best image of all time. But yeah, there are a bunch of holes in it, Dave. You are
Right.
correct. But
Right.
what I would say is, for the sake of this argument, and for the sake of the term hole in topology, which doesn't consider that because they mostly work in a two-dimensional realm, I wouldn't factor that in. I do see your point, though, and I think it's a fair point. I think it's kind of... you lost me for quite a while, but I think it's a fair point. I would still say, to the best of our knowledge, like I know everything has a hole, but it's not a practical hole. So that might be the word I use here, practical. I can't actually use that hole, whereas a straw I can.
Okay. Well, I mean, you wouldn't be able to, but like if you were shrunk down, then it could still be like theoretically practical.
Yeah, if I was atomically large, then
Right.
shit, man, there'd be a lot of holes.
That's why I think, then like if you're gonna call like this like this like 2D object a hole, then you'd have to say that there's like a million holes rather than just saying each circle or circular opening is a hole in and of itself.
Okay, so how about this then? How about we work in a two-dimensional realm where we don't have to deal with atomic-sized holes? Okay.
Okay.
So, look. Do you have my thing pulled up here?
Yeah, I'm looking.
Is this one hole for you? This is two-dimensional. Is this a hole for you? The circle?
I would say that's one hole.
That's one hole. I agree. Now, is this a hole? These two lines. They're not connected in any way, shape, or form. Is this a hole?
No.
Okay. Now, when I put that here, imagine they're attached for a moment. But, see if I can
Yeah, I see what you're saying.
Is that now two holes or one hole?
So it's connected with the circle.
They are connected now.
Then
And assume
that's
it's like a
one
straw.
hole.
Assume it's like a two-dimensional straw that you can go through one end and out the other. Is that still one hole?
Wait, I'm having trouble understanding. Like, how can, if it's 2 dimensions, right?
Yes.
Wait, can you redraw it? Because
let me redraw.
Okay, because if it's 2 dimensions, then there's nothing like behind or in front of those 2 lines, meaning that there's no circular shape at all. Okay, but the other side's just left open?
Yeah.
I would say those 2 lines they don't even matter at all. It's only the circle. Like, if it's in a circular shape, then it can be a hole.
So then, you know, if it's so,
because otherwise, you know, like if we imagine, you know, 2 like toothpicks next to each other, I don't think anyone would call that a hole. They're just like 2 separate lines. And then if you attach that to like a ring at the end of them, right? And you put like you just put like a ring at the end of them, then they would say maybe the ring could be a hole, but they wouldn't be able to say those 2 lines have any, they don't like factor in on any of that at all.
So topology, the study of geometric properties and spatial relations unaffected by the continuous change of shape or size of figures. So trying to figure out the property regardless of how large it is. So regardless of whether we're talking about that piece of paper with the hole through it or a mountain that you punch your fist through and you have a hole on both ends, they're gonna figure out the definition of it. Now, if we look up the topological definition of a hole.
So this is my straw. There's a dotted line on the right side
to
show that the other entrance is on their side. So if this is like, this is our straw, and we punctured a hole like with a bullet, but only on one side of the straw. Like the other side is not see-through, right?
That's 2 holes.
You would say that's 2 holes.
The reason I say that is for the same reason that if I consider that straw a piece of paper and I poked a hole through it, that's a hole. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
So even though it's entering an area which is confined, it's still a hole because it's going through. You know, if I actually take this, I have right here. You know, I can do this, and actually I have it right here. So I have an example right here, actually. This, if we imagine these joints are closed here, this I would consider one hole, and then I would consider this a hole as well. This hole punch as well. I would consider that 2 holes. What would you consider this?
I would say that's 3 holes.
Why not 4? Wait, that should be 4 for you. Because this is this is a 3-dimensional. There's width here. So if you're saying this is you're saying this is 4 holes, right?
Wait. Okay, so you're puncturing a hole all the way through?
No, there's just right here. But it's a piece of paper.
Wait, hang on. Okay, wait. Explain this paper again.
Okay, so imagine this is a straw, right?
Yeah.
You can drink your drink with it, and then you have a hole punch through this straw.
Yeah.
On one end of it, how many holes is this straw now?
Yeah, then it should be 4 holes. If there's 2 like circles, if the hole punch made 2 circles in separate areas of the straw, of the material, then yes, it should be 4 holes.
I would consider this 2 holes. A lot of people are saying actually 1 hole in chat. The reason I think it's 2 holes is because
you can see all the way, like it's one continuous thing, right?
Yeah, it goes through. Yeah, it's a donut. It's a circle. It's a circle. If it's an additional circle, it's a separate entry point. It's a separate hole completely. I think that's 2 holes.
Okay, so let's take this cube. Okay.
You got a cube?
And you puncture a hole through here, and it goes like through here, and then it comes out the other end, right? So that would be like, it's kind of like a straw with like, but it's like a block straw, I guess, right?
Okay.
And then, you know, we have, we could do this. So we have this other hole, and then you would think that, you know, maybe there's like 4 holes like this, right?
Sure.
But what if this hole here actually curved into this one instead?
What do you mean curved?
You couldn't. So like, the tunnel inside of it doesn't go out to the backside, but
Uh-huh.
it actually curves and goes up. So like,
Oh,
but you
okay.
couldn't see all the way through it.
Well,
Would you still consider that 2 holes or 4 holes?
well, so okay, but you're basically saying what it is, but then you're saying, but you don't have that knowledge. Is that right? So you're saying like it is going this way, but I don't know that it is.
No, you can know that it is.
Is it hollow on the inside, or is it a solid cube with one hole that comes out this part and goes up through the top?
It's like a solid cube with the tunnel that connects the two.
That's one hole. That to me,
one
that's
hole.
yeah, that's no different than a straw that's bent.
Okay,
a bendy
then
straw.
shouldn't theoretically this golf course be just one gigantic hole? In your eyes? Because
Yeah,
it's
the golf
basically
course-
the same thing as this cube.
Yeah, the golf course I would consider one hole. I have been thinking about that. I would consider it one hole. I would consider it one hole with 4 entry points.
So as long as things are connected at all, then it's just one hole.
Yeah.
Okay.
I have an issue here. My issue here is like, what if we have a hollow square, a hollow cube
Yeah.
with a bunch of holes in it, right?
Yeah, actually,
It's
what I was
hollow
gonna say actually is
and it has
like
a
ketchup bottle, right?
It has a bunch of holes.
Right.
How many holes is that for you?
That's a bunch of holes. As many holes as there are openings in there. Because-
Different than a cheese block, because a cheese block is solid. I'm saying it's hollow.
Uh-huh.
Just someone.
That's
so,
fine. That's fine.
So
Because the 2D circle is still a hole. So it just has like a ton of holes in it.
how'd you
I mean-
fucking draw cubes so well?
Just
Don't
Just gotta
laugh.
angle-
Don't laugh.
you got the front part of this.
That
part, right?
whoo, shit. That's a nice cube. Okay. So
Yeah.
this cube is hollow, guys. Okay.
Uh-huh.
Everyone on board with this? This is a hollow cube, and we have a bunch of punctured holes in here.
Dude, how are you gonna say that's one hole? You'd see all these circles in this cube, and you'd be like, oh, just put it in the one hole. Like, oh yeah, let's store this coin in the one hole that it has. You'd say, well, just put it in the bigger hole or the smaller hole.
It is
there's
going to
all
be
these
one
different-
hole. Yeah, it is going to be one hole.
You know?
It is
Or
going to
like,
be one
if
hole
there's
because it's
like
all
a-
connected.
If there's a ketchup bottle, right?
Yeah, Heinz,
And-
preferably.
Yeah, Heinz, I love Heinz.
Okay.
And, you squirt the ketchup out of the end of the hole, right?
Yeah, as I always
if,
do.
If a hole, like if another opening got stabbed into the bottom of the ketchup bottle, so that things were falling out, right? Like the ketchup was just spilling.
Yes.
And someone said, "Can you cover up that hole?" What would
That's
you do?
English. That's an English language argument, Kira. That's an English language argument. And the same reason that doesn't work is the same reason when people look at a piece of paper and they say poke a hole or hole in the wall or burning a hole in my pocket, hole puncher. I would say that's an English language argument, and I would throw that out just because the
Okay.
English language ain't right. It ain't consistent. It ain't
okay.
consistent.
I guess. But even with the 2D, like if we just use the definition of a hole from topology, and the 2D like space is still a hole, the 2D circle is still a hole, then, I mean, just like any kind of...
And a mathematical object is a topological structure which prevents the object from being continuously shrunk to a point. So I read this before, and I don't fucking understand it at all. But
It just... Yeah,
do you get it?
I think so.
What do you
I
think
mean, it
this
just
means?
means, it has to have some sort of space in between, like, the walls of the circle. Otherwise, it's just one point. I think.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I see what you're saying.
Yeah.
Yeah. So no matter how small the circle gets, they can't be shrunk to a point. Whoops.
I mean, no, I understand what you're saying. I kind of see it, except... But, like, no one... I guess what we should have done, right? The thing we should have done was decide through, like, what framework or, like, what terms we were going to argue this.
I'm arguing from the mathematical topological standpoint, the standpoint where the only way it can be consistent. right? So from your point of view, I think there's a lot of inconsistencies, and I think we hit that with the house and the mountain, and then the house and the bigger mountain. It really comes down to perspective and viewpoint whether someone lives in a hole. You know?
And why is that not okay to decide?
You could argue that everybody on Earth lives in a hole except for the people who are on the highest peaks. You know what I'm saying? You really could.
Yeah. No, I see what you're saying.
So only the person who lives on the top of what's that fucking mountain? Everest. Everest. Yeah. Only the dude who lives there is not in a hole, but everybody else is in a hole because they're all below it. But that I don't think that's the world. I don't want to live in a hole. That's not the world I want to live in.
Yeah. Okay, I can see that. That doesn't make sense.
And then if we go to the mathematical argument where a hole has to be like the reason. So this is actually I think a little fucky, and this is where like even I start to back away from my own argument. But I'm gonna stick with it. This is one hole. This is 4 holes. This is a piece of Swiss cheese. And then this is a hollow cube.
Okay.
I'm arguing this is 1 hole and this is 4.
So if you showed that to like a mathematician, then he would agree that the yellow one is 4 holes.
Let me quickly ask.
No, he would agree that the green one is 1 hole.
Yes, I think so.
I really don't want to like end it this way.
Sure.
But I think that if we're going to use it by the English language, which I agree is like very inconsistent.
Yes.
But almost nobody on Earth would say that the green one is 1 hole because of the way that we use the language, you know? Like no one would say that, oh yeah, we should plug up the 1 hole in the ketchup bottle instead of like the like like they wouldn't be like, oh yeah, cover up that one side of the ketchup bottle because now there's a hole where there wasn't. They would just be like, oh yeah, cover up the bottom hole that's leaking, or you know, or like if there's a that kid's toy, like put the round peg in a square thingy, whatever.
Round hole,
like,
yeah.
Yeah, they wouldn't be like, oh yeah, just put it in the 1 hole that's there. You know, they would say like, there's 8 openings here. And there's only 1 hole that this block fits into, you know. So in the English language sense, which I agree is a little weird, then I don't think there's any question that there's 2 holes. If we're going to the mathematical way, then you might be right.
And I see what you're saying. The issue that and the only reason that I say you can't, argue from the English language is because that's not consistent, even among the English language. It wouldn't be consistent among other languages, If you speak to someone who speaks Japanese or French or whatever, it wouldn't be consistent among those languages because we use terminologies that are specific to the United States. And it's not even consistent within our own language, which is why, I had those examples. I'll just bring it back up for anyone who didn't see. But these examples. Where all these words are using a single hole, but they're using multiple definitions of hole. There's a difference between digging a hole, poking a hole, but we English language we use all of them. So our American
I guess to really
language.
Prove that, I'd have to find another instance where things are still defined as a certain way despite them being slightly inconsistent. I mean,
and so
I guess that gets into like definitions of words that can mean different things.
Yeah. To recap though, so when you see a straw, you see 2 holes, and if you put your thumb on one end of it, that's 1 hole.
Yeah.
So a hole becomes 2 holes the moment it gains depth. Right?
No, the moment it has a second opening, because there's another circle in there.
Well, the issue is that it always has a second opening because we're leaving a 3D world. So anytime it has depth, which is every single time, it's gonna have 2 holes, right? So if you and I'm saying poke a hole through something, right? So if you have like,
okay, yeah, then
but
there would always be 2 holes.
But a circle is 1 hole for you, right?
Yes.
And so then I think this is where the mathematical definition comes in. because math defines a hole as a circle, and then a straw, and this is the topological definition, and I believe I'm correct on this, a straw is a hole plus an integer or length. And then the way they break it down is they say, okay, a circle is one hole, and an integer is 0 holes. So it doesn't matter how large the integer is, how big the straw is. If it goes on for infinity, it's always going to be one hole, because a circle is only one hole. And it doesn't matter how much depth that circle has, how long that integer is, it's still going to be just one.
Okay. Well, then mathematically, I'd have to do more research to like really prove that wrong. I don't think there's much else I could say to that one.
I couldn't even understand the topological definition when I first read it. So
what was a torus?
Fuck if I know. Wait. We got a mathematician, PhD in applied math. Do you want to hop in here? Do you want to take some cues? Want to hop in and talk to some people?
Yeah, say that again.
We have some mathematicians in chat. Would you mind if they join the Discord call and give their input?
Not,
okay, let's.
We need them in here.
Pal,
right.
how's it going? So go ahead, say your piece, and algebra will get you in here right after.
Can you guys hear me?
I can hear you great. I think everyone else can hear you. Everyone else hear him? Speak again. Can you say something again?
Yeah.
Yeah, they can hear you.
All right, testing. All right, cool. Yeah, can you hear me? All right, sick. All right, hold on. Let me mute the stream so I don't fucking blow my ears out.
No shekos.
Yeah. All right, so basically the thing is, so if you think about it this way, a straw is just like a really long donut, right? Because if you think about it, if you're saying a straw has 2 holes, right? If that's your argument.
Yeah.
So a straw has 2 holes. If you make it shorter and shorter and shorter until it gets to like a ring, at what point does it stop having 2 holes? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. So basically, how much depth does it have to have? I think Dave was saying any depth at all. So as long as it's 3-dimensional, it's always 2 holes, was Dave's argument.
Okay, that's interesting. So what about a donut? So a donut, the inner thing, it's like a circular ring is sort of how the hole is, because it's like here, I might actually drop like a GIF in the Discord. Let's see, boom. Yeah, so a donut, the inner thing of a donut is like a circle, and so its hole is actually just a 1-dimensional circle, and it's got these round ass edges. So the hole has actually no depth, but it still has a hole in it, 1 hole. But then you stretch it out, and it still has 1 hole, no matter how tall the donut is.
Okay, wait, let me pull this up for people.
Kind of hard to explain, but that GIF I posted is something showing that you can like you can morph stuff around, and it still just has 1 hole, even though the coffee cup, you think of it as having another hole.
Yeah. So that whole coffee cup is 1 hole.
Yeah, it's just got the 1 hole, and that's sort of I think the big thing that I forget who it was saying. Someone was saying like if you just stick your finger like in the cheese or whatever, you have created a hole. Well, you haven't really created a hole until you poke through the other side. So that's the real crux of it, I think.
So when I gave you that Swiss cheese thing, the Swiss cheese had 4 holes, right?
If you can get back to the picture, I can tell you.
I think I got rid of it, but it's just like a piece of Swiss cheese with 4 pokes. If I poke a piece of Swiss cheese in 4 separate places.
Yeah, as long as it goes all the way through, then yeah, it's
those are 4 holes, right?
Yeah, but if you just take a block of cheese and just stick your finger in it 4 times, then you just have a block of Swiss cheese that you've sort of just indented 4 times. But if you go all the way through,
that probably feels real good though. What about Dave? I linked you the Discord, so just join it from there. But what about if you have a hollow cube?
A hollow cube.
Yes, we have a hollow cube, and then I poke 10 holes on each side of that cube, on all 6 sides.
Okay, 10 holes on each side? Okay.
Yeah. Of a cube.
Yeah, so then you've got a 2-dimensional object with 60 holes. So you have something with 60 holes.
Wait, a cube, 3-dimensional, but it's a hollow. Does it make it 2D?
You said a hollow cube. So
yeah.
Yeah. So it's basically it's made out of paper. That means it's 2-dimensional.
Okay. But it's not 2-dimensional. I mean, it's 3-dimensional.
I know what you mean.
Yeah.
But it's something that is 2-dimensional embedded in 3-dimensional space. So it's like it's the difference between like a block. It's the difference between a big block of like a steel cube and a hollow cube you fold out of paper. But
So,
I think the difference is the number of holes still doesn't matter. More like you're still poking 60 holes in it. You know, that's what you're doing, because you're going all the way through the two-dimensional surface. But if you had a three-dimensional cube, like an actual just a steel block of cube, and you just sort of got a drill and just sort of drilled 10 little itty bitty divots in each side that didn't go all the way through, then you just have no holes in it, even though you've poked little divots in it.
Okay, so the hole, for it to be a full hole that's drilled all the way through, it needs to have like substance or material surrounding it all the way to the other side.
Okay, for it to be a hole, the only way you could have possibly generated it is by, so imagine that whatever your object is made out of like the most malleable, silly putty thing, whatever. You can stretch it, whatever you can do.
Yeah.
So if the only way for that hole to have been created is for you to have ripped the material, then it's a hole. So think about it. If you start from just a ball of silly putty, is it possible to, let's see, I think you can't glue it and you can't tear it. I think those are the rules. Yeah, so if all you can do is stretch it and you can't make a hole, then it has the same number of holes as the thing you started with. So a donut, if you start stretching a donut, you're always going to have one hole. If you start with a sphere and you start stretching it, if you don't rip it or glue it, you're always going to have 0 holes because a sphere has 0 holes. If that sort of makes sense. So what I'm saying is, like, if you can stretch your thing out and not make a new hole, then that's sort of the number of holes you started with. I don't know. It's sort of hard to explain without pictures.
I actually no. I think I do get it. Okay, I have one question that I don't have the answer to.
Yeah, what's that?
So if there was a straw, and there was like that Play-Doh, you know, the malleable material size thing inside of it. There's just like a ball of it inside of it, so that, you know, it fills up the entire straw, and technically there, you know, mathematically there's no hole all the way through. Okay.
Yeah. So now I've got a cylinder, right? Just a full cylinder.
Not all the way through, but just like one pebble, kind of like inside of the straw. And then you made a hole through that. So it's like like if you put a straw-sized quarter into the straw, and then you punctured a hole through the quarter.
Okay. So basically, okay, no. So it's sort of like, is it the same as sort of taking 2 solo cups, sticking them bottom to bottom, and drilling a hole through it? Is that sort of what you're saying?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay, then yeah, you still have one hole, and you could. So if you think about it, if that's made out of rubber, you can take the rubber on the inside and smooth it out to the edges. Then you just have your straw back. So you still have the same number of holes.
Okay, I see.
So the object you talked about is the same. I'm using air quotes right now. You can't see me, but it's the same as a straw mathematically, topologically.
Okay, and then, well, would they, if there were 2 different materials in there, then could they say that there's 2 holes in there? Because there's one through the, or is that a different kind of idea?
Well, then that's a good point, because this whole like sort of esoteric math argument. The reason you use it is because it has a very precise definition, but the sort of things that make it fall apart is when you try to apply it to real life. So math is just a very good descriptor of real life. Like, you know, there aren't really an infinite amount of anythings in real life, but you use infinity for everything in math.
Right.
But so your question, the reason I'm using the stretchy putty example is because that's probably the closest analog you have to this concept in real life. But, you know, obviously, like the real life and the mathematical ideal is not the same thing.
I see.
So that's an interesting thing. So using these mathematical definitions isn't necessarily the best descriptor of how things actually work. So using, this esoteric definition of a math thing, saying it has one hole, that is one definition, but it might not be the definition that's best for our real life version of how we think a straw is.
Right.
So it's sort of like a point of view thing. Like, what sort of things do you value? Do you value things that have really axiomatic rules and stuff like that, or do you value things that are more practical?
So what I'm thinking right now is we have to find another question that cannot be defined fully by any means, or has different properties depending on which types of definitions you're using for it, so that people can go nuts over another question like this.
Yeah. So like, if you think mathematically, topologically, you'd say, you know, it's got one hole. If you think, I don't know, who the fuck thinks it has 0 holes? That's some dumb shit.
Anyone think it has 0 holes? Anyone want to fight for 0 holes? But you have to be real about it, don't
Yeah, I want to see some. I want to see some.
I don't think
piss
anyone's
up
being
for
real
0
about
holes.
it. I think they're all just, you know.
I guess you could think of it, if you think of it, if you get a sheet of paper that has 0 holes and then you fold it, you can like mold it into a straw. I don't know, maybe there's something there.
Perfect. There's a couple people in chat. So guys, what you need to do is actually just go fuck yourselves. Because I think you're wrong on that one,
actually,
boys.
You can actually, if you think about it, your entire body is like a straw, so you can go fuck yourselves through your 0 holes.
Oh my god. I'm kidding, guys. Don't actually, you know. I mean, if you want to fuck yourselves. I'm getting this nice image.
Yeah, I guess there's not a solid, you know, definition for this. I just really wanted to know if there's a hole through the quarter and through the straw. So that's 2 holes, or that's just 1 hole, or like. But I guess there's no way.
Yeah, no, I see your question now. So if you're thinking there's a quarter inside, so if you think about it that way, if the quarter is like attached, if it's part of the straw,
right? But it's still
just got,
like a separate material, I guess, somehow.
So if it's part of the straw, then you just have a straw with a weird thing in the middle that makes it harder to suck. But if it's not part of the straw, then you just have a straw with like a piece of shit in the middle that's stuck in it. You know what I mean?
Uh-huh.
So, and that sort of comes to a real world, like what actually is most practical.
All right, I'm gonna go chat over with Doc. Thanks, boys. I feel like this group's all in agreement. I'm gonna try to turn another naysayer. Doctor.
Yo.
Don't know why doctor's in your name if you're trying to argue for 2 holes.
Okay, so I had you guys on mute for a little bit there. I was talking to Joe about some of this stuff, and now I've got your stream on mute, so it's just me and you now.
Okay. Just me and you, and the hundreds of thousands of people watching.
Hundreds of thousands. This should be a very consistent stream idea. So basically, at the very beginning of the stream, before we got into anything, the idea that I had was a hole could be defined by the concept of depth in something, which is why something like a donut or a ring has 1, because it's like, you know, the diameter of the hole is nowhere near the length of the width of the object that it is, whereas something like a straw or a tunnel, like, what's the length of the diameter of the opening of a straw, and how long is that straw? Like, I think that plays a part in it. And the fact that when you take a straw and like each opening or each hole, whichever one you want to call it, has 2 different like jobs, whereas a donut hole and a ring hole, they don't have like 2 separate jobs. You know what I mean? Like, they don't serve 2 separate purposes. Their purpose is that now, well, I don't know what the purpose of a donut hole is, but the purpose of a ring hole is that you can now wear
cooks
it,
evenly.
You know what I mean?
So cooks evenly.
Okay, so it cooks evenly.
Yeah.
I wasn't 100% on that, actually.
So, okay, so you're trying to say that because the length of a straw, you know, a certain length, it has different... Okay, so when? How long does a straw have to be then?
Well, I would say that that is something that, and this is what hurts me, doesn't necessarily have a fine line, but it's just one of those, like, you look at something and you can make the call, and then maybe if you had something that was just the right sort of ratio of diameter of hole to length of object, then you would have an argument where it's like, actually, I don't know, that's on the line. But I would say a donut and a ring are far too short, and
Doc, I'm just going to cut you off here. What I'm going to say, and I hear what you're saying, and I feel like I've heard out kind of your argument. So basically it depends on the length. The donut hole's it doesn't have enough depth to be 2 holes. What I'll say is I don't think any amount of depth should affect the amount of holes that it has. If we're speaking from, you know, a consistent standpoint, or else there's no consistency, and else your argument for holes is very arbitrary, and you know, yeah, it basically throws out any definition of a hole at all, because it's all arbitrary and it's all perspective. And I think Dave ran into that problem a little bit. It sounds like you have a little bit of a different view. But do you see what I'm saying? It doesn't matter if you have a straw that's a centimeter long or a straw that's 1 mile long. It should not change. There shouldn't be like, oh, we hit 12 inches, baby, 2 holes now. It's the same thing. It doesn't matter. Because a smaller human could use a straw that's 1 inch long. It could serve that 2 functions.
Well, that's why I was saying it's not just about length. It's more about ratio of how big is the opening and how long is this thing. So, like, yeah, you could have a 1 centimeter straw, but is the opening of the straw like a mile in diameter and then it's 1 inch length? Like, then that's something different. But is it like that's what I was originally thinking when this whole stream started. But then there was like different things going on, like with this transforming mug donut thing I can't stop looking at.
Yeah.
The suggestion there is that it's all got 1 hole, right?
Yes.
And I'm not about to say 2 holes for the mug. I don't care about that. What my question is, if you took that GIF and you made it, instead of a mug and a donut, you just had a rectangle that represented a piece of paper, right? And you followed the rule, and you followed the rules of you can only morph it, you can't tear it, you can't whatever else.
Yeah.
The idea of the GIF is like, however many holes it has is how many holes it will always have. So if you start off with a 0 hole rectangle sheet of paper morphable GIF,
you could never have a hole.
You can never have a hole, even if you rolled it into a cylinder.
No, because those aren't connected points.
Those aren't connected points?
No.
What do you mean?
If you roll a piece of paper like this, you have my stream open, right? So I have a piece of paper, and if I do this, this isn't a hole because this isn't a connection. I can say, you know, for argument's sake that, hey, imagine I weld it together or something and seal it. But at that point, you're no longer transforming it in just the sense of just, you know, moving it around kind of like the cup is. You have to do an outside force. So that's not that rectangle argument. I don't think. I feel like you're kind of with me on that one. I don't think that would help because you'd have to do more than just change the shape of it.
Okay, no, that makes sense. That makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
I can live with that one.
And then the only reason that I'm saying that you can't say that, you know, it's a hole at a certain length is because 1, it's arbitrary. 2, it should be consistent for all objects, you know, no matter how long or short. I don't think any object changes dependent on, you know, the length of it. I don't think it changes class. You know, a circle doesn't become a different shape just because it's a really large circle. And that's what topology really breaks down to. It's the study of shapes regardless of size, regardless, you know, of that factor. Yeah. And that's the only reason that I don't think that argument makes sense. But I don't know. Are you still stuck on that one? Or are you going to join the men and the women of America with this?
No, I think one of the things with this conversation was I didn't really notice at the beginning that there was a solid agreement on what we're calling a hole. So I felt like, just similar to the Portal one last week, there was just this divide in what we were even talking about. So from like a topological standpoint, I can see how it can be perceived as one hole.
Yeah.
But from a conversational like standpoint, you know what I mean? Like,
yeah,
if
so that's
I'm just like talking to someone about something, I'm gonna be like in a tunnel, you know, I'm gonna be like, yo, they came in through that hole, I'm going in through this hole, and I'm not gonna, you know, have them be like, no, it's actually openings or whatever. Like,
yeah,
where it's kind of like, you know, if you split hairs about it, you could, like, everything, there are no 2 hole objects. Everything's just one at that point. It feels like what has 2 holes then? Is what I'm trying to figure out.
Well, like if you have a piece of Swiss cheese and you poke 2 holes in it, that's 2 holes. Those are 2 separate holes.
Well, what about non-2D objects?
Well, cheese isn't 2D, bruv. What you think this is? Tom and
Well,
Jerry?
you were saying like slices.
Yeah, that's
or
still...
were you not saying...
Okay, but even if you have a block of cheese, if I poke my finger all the way through it, you know, it doesn't matter the depth of the piece of cheese, right? If I have a thickened piece of cheese, I just have to poke my hole in a little longer. But the only reason that I think you can't argue this, and we have to argue it topologically, or we can't argue it from a conversational point of view, an English language point of view, is because if you say, you know, like, hey, I dug a hole in the sand. Okay, then, you know, if I have that piece of putty in my hand, and I try to make it a circle, are all these divots holes? You know? Are all, everything's a hole at that point. Every single crevice is a hole.
I would agree with what you're saying, but I would say with the putty argument, what makes them not holes, again, would have to do with an arbitrary interpretation. And so I know it wouldn't be accepted, but it would just be like, I can't fill this divot with something in a meaningful way, like the height of walls and like the depth and the closeness and like diameter. Like that's what I think would have to matter. But
you know the path you're going now, though. The path you're going now is like, what does a meaningful way mean? I have crevices in my hand that I can fill with peanut butter right now. Is that a hole because I can fill it? Is that meaningful? Like that? I don't think you could argue that consistently, which is why you can't say it's 2 holes.
No, I know. That's what I'm saying. Is it isn't something you can argue consistently. But
say it's 1 hole, Doc.
Just, what, for a straw?
Say it's 1 hole.
For a straw?
Yeah. Fucking say it.
I could concede that.
Fucking say it. Yeah, that's right, Doc. Thank you. Appreciate you tuning in. All right, guys. I think that about does it for the argument. The 2-holers out of here. The 0-holers never gonna be in here. 0-holers have no holes because they are full of shit. Powell, I mean, poetic, to say the least. He just alphas everyone into agreeing. Get in this Discord! And I'll try to alpha you into agreeing. Lud really needed that win after last week's pounding. I mean, my Twitter poll says otherwise. There is a Twitter poll. If you guys still want to argue, if you still want to vote, this Twitter poll is actually a lot closer than that shitty argument that Neep lost last week. It's actually really close. It's 54-46 with like over 100 people voting, I think. So I don't know, like 50 of you got some didn't watch a stream or just dumb as bricks. Are these every Thursday? Yeah, I think I'm gonna do them every Thursday. I don't know what to argue next week. I don't know who I'll argue yet. I'm thinking maybe the banana argument, you know?
The banana and the hand are perfectly made one for the other. You'll find the maker of the banana, Almighty God, has made it with a non-slip surface. It has outward indicators of inward contents. Green,
good shit, God.
Too early, yellow just right, black too late. Now if you go to the top of the banana, you'll find, as with the soda can makers, they placed a tab at the top. So God has placed a tab at the top.
Yeah, he did do that.
On the tab, the contents don't squirt in your face. You'll find the wrapper, which is biodegradable, has perforations. Notice how gracefully it sits over the human hand. Notice it has a point at the top for ease of entry. It's just the right shape for the human mouth. It's chewy, easy to digest, and it's even curved toward the face to make the whole process so much easier. Seriously, Kirk, the whole of creation testifies to the genius of God's creative hand. It absolutely does.
Shit, man, that's... Oh, boy. I didn't get out of the way. Sorry, guys. Yeet!